transmasculine bottom surgery is currently unavailable to NHS patients in the UK. Just a note on that, the name I've given this story is I took it from the reporting that's going around. I really hate the reporting that's going around. They keep calling it transmasculine bottom surgery instead of phalloplasty, when transmasculine bottom surgery also includes metoidioplasty, which is a different thing that is completely unrelated. Pink news, and the other ones, please do like 5 seconds of research. Please, I'm begging you. But yes, transmasculine people in England, Scotland, and Wales initially lost access to phalloplasty at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when surgeries classified as elective were put on hold to divert resources to COVID patients. Fair enough. However, despite it being announced on the 27th of April that elective surgeries could resume, transmasculine patients still do not have access to phalloplasty through the NHS, because the only NHS-funded provider of phalloplasty in the UK, which is St. Peter's Andrology Centre, does not own hospital facilities and was not able to secure a contract with a hospital site. Currently, we have no estimate for when St. Peter's can provide services again. During this time, while the situation remains unresolved, the NHS has decided to just completely suspend referrals for phalloplasty, and they've tried to re-tender the contract they had with St. Peter's, but the truth is that St. Peter's was the only provider to even bid for the contract in the first place back in 2019. So it doesn't seem likely that they're going to find another provider, which is very unfortunate. Because the thing is, without NHS funding, phalloplasty is estimated to cost between £40,000 and £70,000, according to the gender construction kit. Phalloplasty is also done in 3 stages, with most stages, some of these stages requiring multiple surgeries. So at least 3 surgeries, almost always more. And patients need to take weeks of rest in between each operation. Sometimes they need to take additional time off work, as well as the time off work they had to take to rest. And it's a really expensive, complicated procedure that only the most privileged person can afford on their own dime. Like no trans man who isn't famous or isn't in like a really well-paying blue-collar job is going to be able to afford this. So effectively, no transmasculine people in the UK can get phalloplasty. Unfortunately, I can't. So I was just going to say, unfortunately, I can't provide much insight into how that affects people on a psychological level, because firstly, I'm not interested in phalloplasty. But like any other kind of transition, the effect of not being able to get it if you need it is really bad.
Yeah, and just a reminder, when it comes to the transphobia in the UK and who they target with trans youth, it is typically trans men and non-binary people who were assigned female at birth. They're the targets. They're the people that the gender critical crowd has gone they're being brainwashed, etc. They need to be stop transing our girls is the narrative and all of that. So after all the shit that's been going on for years, the year-long waiting list to even be seen for your first referral, which is the first step in order to then later on receive surgical confirmation if that's what you require, to then have that pulled away as well, the level of cruelty that's going on here is just amazing. And people might say, oh well, no one planned for this, etc. Yeah, but it's the NHS's job, it's its duty to the public to ensure that all medically necessary procedures, which phalloplasty is, it is an essential thing, it is a life-saving procedure for some trans people. It is their duty to ensure that that is accessible. And for whichever fuckery they've gone through, that hasn't been the case. So yes,
Yeah.
I'll turn to you.
Yeah, no, it is a mess. Part of me does wonder, like, why couldn't they just get St. Peter's a hospital site? Why is that so hard? Why did they have a situation where only one organization bid, and they didn't think, let's go try and round up a few more? It's honestly just negligence. Every other procedure for trans people had, two or three, or I think one had 5 different providers, and this one they're like, okay, one provider, that's enough. And it actually is quite concerning because it was a some of you may not have heard of sorry, there was an error in the thing. Some of you may not have heard the story of a trans man who had his vagina removed without his consent. The doctor who did that was working for St. Peter's Andrology Clinic at the time. And he only received a 5-month suspension for it. So as far as I know, he is still working. Now, thankfully, neither him nor the colleague who tried to cover up with him do seem to be working for St. Peter's. They weren't mentioned in the Pink News article that I read, and I don't see them on the page showing the team members of St. Peter's. But it still raises questions to me, I think. The fact that St. Peter's was contracted as the sole provider after having this on their record. And, the fact that Transmasc people in the UK, they don't have a choice. They have to go with this provider where this horrible thing was done to a trans man. And it also kind of raises questions about the safety of phalloplasty for trans men in general, because I can see why this happened. Even being a trans man who isn't interested in phalloplasty myself, I still have to admit there's that niggling thought in the back of my mind that if you did want, phalloplasty, but you didn't want to go the whole 9 yards and get everything else removed, then there's something wrong with you. Then you're not really a man. And so if I have that as someone who is kind of sort of in that group myself, I can only imagine how it would look to an old cis man.
And it kind of has echoes of the whole dance that they make you go through just in order to receive your gender recognition certificate. Oh, you've got to be performing as your gender for 2 years. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Oh, that means you've got to be in ballroom gowns and shit for 2 years.
Yeah.
Have you been around a woman?
It is an extension of that same transphobic violence where it's like you do not get to exist on your terms. You have to exist on our terms. It actually brings to mind the other day I happened to see on Twitter there was a trans man saying, I got top surgery but I'm not interested in bottom surgery, and people are telling me that I'm not really a man. And what I said to him was, cis men are just one kind of man. There are also trans men, there are non-binary men. Cis men are not more man than they are. And if you are trying to be a poor imitation, if you're trying to get bottom surgery, not because that's what you want, but because you're trying to be a poor imitation of a cis man, then you're trying to pretend to be someone else who society considers more acceptable. That's really the same logic as not transitioning at all. But here we kind of see that logic being forced on people. That no, you can't be your own sort of man. You can't pursue masculinity on your own terms or manhood on your own terms. You have to fit into the box that we have made for you, which asserts that cis men are the only real kind of man, and you have to be like them. And it's really worrying. It makes me worry about the health and safety of trans masculine people, especially trans men. It also is really concerning for issues like whether or not diversity is allowed in society. And I'm sorry, I keep blanking like every
That's
5
right.
seconds.
I think both of us are very tired.
It was in my head. Diversity, safety. What was the other one? No, it has gone out of my mind.
Freedom of expression. I don't know.
Yes, yes, freedom of expression. And the human rights surrounding that. If I were really good and I did a good job of this story, I would have actually had a look at, I was considering having a look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and being like, this violates the da 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 da. But the thing is, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a bit outdated sometimes, and not very inclusive, if I'm entirely honest.
Yeah. Also, whenever you do like show human rights, very often trans folks don't give a damn. I had that experience in 2019.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Sometimes.
It's just ultimately, way to put it is bodily autonomy for everyone, but not trans people. They're limited. Yes. Is there anything else to add to the story, or?
I don't have any other points. I feel like I'm missing something. Like there should be a better conclusion to it than that. I can't really think of anything.
Honestly, sometimes news is just in the making. Like, hopefully something will be resolved, something will be found, there will be an alternative raised. But then again, we are in a time period where the Tories are fucking waging a class war and stripping away the NHS. So it's like, what are the odds of that? I want to be hopeful.
I guess a couple of things I could elaborate on is the overarching theme in the story is two things. One is that phalloplasty, being such an expensive, complicated procedure, it's one that any trans person who needs it will need a lot of support to get, whether that's through the NHS or the trans community or anything like that. And also, there's a great deal of vulnerability involved in that, doctors may try to override your bodily autonomy. They may not respect what you want. I guess the other element in that whole story is kind of the idea, I think, of quote unquote female anatomy being worse than male anatomy. So like, why would you even want to keep your vagina? It's worse. And all of that, I guess, comes together into this idea of trans men in a situation are vulnerable and do need support, especially from the trans community. But then a lot of the attitudes I see in the trans community and the queer community is one of trans men being privileged and taking up too much space and being a danger to the rest of the queer community. It's not everyone, but I do see a lot of it out there, and it does concern me. And it's situations like this that make me think that we need to stop doing that.
And that's why I'm always like, whenever it comes up, I'm always like the first to point out the facts that when it comes to the gender critical, they like the gender critical movement in the UK, they have two arguments. Trans people are a danger in public spaces like the bathroom, and the other is trans people are brainwashing your children. And it's like, okay, like clearly like the danger to like people in like public spaces, that is transmisogyny. But when it comes to like the whole brainwashing, which gets linked to autism and ableism and all that, that is always focused on trans men, etc. That is specifically focused on them. They're not giving a shit about trans women in that. Or I say giving a shit, pretending to give a shit about trans women in that way.
No one has said, oh, they're brainwashing your sons into thinking that they're okay, like a few people have said that, but it's like, oh, they're brainwashing your sons into think that they're females. No one is saying, oh, they're brainwashing your poor, sweet, innocent little Jimmy into thinking he's a girl, and that's going to hurt him. It's disgust for women that motivates that argument, not pretending to care about the vulnerability of trans girls and trans
The only
women.
other group that really makes that argument are like the incel community and the whole like soy boy thing, which is just toxic masculinity, which is not, again, that's that toxicity towards femininity that you talk about. No one is caring about, you know, teenage trans girls. They're making the argument. That's why they always go, why are girls like 17 times more likely to go through this like process? You know, that's why they point out those statistics.
The thing is, when I was looking into this story, there was a part of me that was kind of thinking, why are we even talking about this? Why are we taking time and focus away from other things affecting the trans community that are more important? Because I realized I've started to internalize this attitude that trans men don't matter and that trans men are inherently privileged over the rest of the trans community and inherently violent and like oppressing everyone and greedily gobbling up all the resources, to the point that like having one story focusing on trans men made me feel bad.
Yeah. So I guess
please be nicer to trans men.
That's like we don't accept that bullshit here. You know, it's like Essence of Community is open to all people, and that includes trans men. That includes trans men speaking about their issues. You know,
I hope it's open to trans men, because if not, you've lost like 90% of your admin.
So you know, but yeah, so I know we don't talk about the issues that trans men and transmasc non-binary people face. Sadly, that's because we don't have a lot of people on the ground who can act as primary sources for us. You know, we're not a giant media conglomerate that has reporters on the ground. We can only get what the papers like discuss, which in turn filters everything down. It's a selection process going on, but we are trying our best.
I try to add as much insight as I can, but I'm only one trans man, and I am very lucky as well. I don't have to deal with that much in terms of discrimination. My dysphoria is pretty much under control, and also, you know, I'm only one person. I can't provide insight into an entire demographic that well, but we do try.